Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us for What's Going On, Part 2 here at SphinxConnect 2022. My name is Allyssa Jones, she series pronouns. I'm the founder and publisher of Rising Tide Music Press, and I am thrilled to be here. Before we begin, I just want to remind you to head over to the ballroom to the Q&A tab for questions, if you have questions, to add those there. And then I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the Sphinx organization, Afa, Abigail, Yasmin, the team here for creating this space and bringing us all together for SphinxConnect and for this conversation that's about to happen. Settle in, get comfortable, because it's going to be a great one. We are following What's Going On Part 1 panel in 2019, moderated by Lee Kuntz, who's here with us today. And I just want to, I've been, as I've told the panels a couple of times. I was just so inspired as a someone who's running a young organization, brand new, by the conversation that is on YouTube on the Sphinx channel. You can check it out there. But Lee Kuntz there, joined by Darren Atwater, the founder of the Soulful Symphony, Alexander Lang, principal clarinetist of the Phoenix Symphony, and was representing Gateway's music festival. At that panel discussion, Chichi Nwanoku, artistic and executive director of Chineke Foundation, and the Terrence L. Patterson, founder and executive director of the Ritz Chamber Players. There was so much truth being spoken at that panel, so much to keep thinking about. And so we're going to do that here today. This session continues the conversation with the kind of post-2020 lens. So that was 2019. Here we are 3 years later. So we're going to talk about what's going on now. And at this point, I'd like to welcome our panelists, Ashleigh Gordon, artistic and executive director and violist of Castle of Our Skins, Jeri Lynne Johnson, founder and artistic director for Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra, and Lee Kuntz, president and artistic director of the Gateways Music Festival. Please welcome these folks where you are. Give a big round of applause, raise your coffee mug, whatever it is that you have there. Welcome, everyone. We're going to take about 4 to 5 minutes each. And I'd love for you to just share your story, your organization's story, why or how you came to be, and an overview of your work. And then after that, we'll get into conversation with questions from our viewers right away. So let's go ahead and get started. So Ashleigh.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having this time and the space. The Sphinx organization making the time and space for this. Happy and honored to be on a panel with colleagues and amazing thought leaders. Ashleigh Gordon, and as Allyssa had introduced, I am artistic and executive director and violist, also co-founder of Castle of Our Skins, which is a Boston-based concert and education series with a mission to foster cultural curiosity, celebrate Black artistry through music. About the organization, I'll sort of give an overview first of our work and then reverse engineer about why we do the work. As a Black arts institution, we strive to center Black expression, history, narrative in our programming. That often looks like chamber music concerts featuring the works of African diasporic classical composers, largely classical composers, from the past 500 years in multiple locations, multiple geographies, often paired with spoken word, dance, visual art, or some other complementary artistic discipline, artistic expression. Our programming often looks like events that center current and historical topics, things that we have done historically in our programming, concerts called Freedom Rising, for instance, Resistance Resilience, I Am a Man, based on the 1963 sanitation strike slogan, Black Love, which we presented virtually, as many organizations have presented virtual programming during this pandemic. While I consider all of our programming, be it in concert spaces or virtual concert spaces or classrooms, to be educational. Our formally structured educational work often includes interactive workshops with and for youth that highlight Black history, historical figures, etc., and more recently developing educational curriculum for teachers and teaching artists and publishing those so that it's not just a Castle of Our Skins party that we get to have in terms of our work with youth, but other organizations, other teaching artists are able to engage as well. We are midway through our 9th season. We recently finished our first ever strategic plan. And anyone who has ever done a strategic plan, you know all the work that is involved with that and all the reflection that's involved with that. And we're also looking ahead to our 10th anniversary. So we're in a really interesting place of being reflective about our journey and also being mindful about how we want to intentionally craft the next decade and hopefully decades. So in thinking about the space where we occupy, the sort of reason for why we do what we do, I think it's largely still the same as from day one. Our initial reasons for forming this organization. And some of those reasons, I won't be exhaustive here, and I'm sure this has parallels to the other reasons for my fellow colleagues here on this panel started the work that they have invested so much energies in. Lack of representation that is in concert spaces, that is in history books, that is offered for audiences, especially being Boston-based, which is a rich artistic city and certainly rich in terms of classical music. I'm a graduate of New England Conservatory and didn't know that Florence Price, among many others, walked through my doors. And to be able to acknowledge and celebrate the soil that I am fortunate enough to occupy and create and steward, to be able to acknowledge the richness of Black artistry and excellence that has that's in my proximity, and certainly in the proximity of so many other Bostonians specifically, is really meaningful. So representation first and foremost. As a co-founder, my fellow co-founder Anthony R. Green, composer, pianist, classmate, we were 1 and 2 next to each other at graduation, Ashleigh Gordon, Anthony Green, both being Black when there was no Black student union at New England Conservatory, and finding fellowship amongst ourselves with multiple degrees, not knowing, having a feeling of disconnect with our own roots as Black musicians, and certainly in the genre of classical music. So a disconnect that I wanted to fight against as a Black artist and other colleagues that I've known with their connection to this expression, to this sector that doesn't seem to be representative, although it's rich with 500 years plus of excellence in artistry. Also the need, as I am an educator of over 20 years, the need to reach youth and to do so with early intervention around stories of Black excellence in their formative years. I like to also think about flooding collective consciousness with stories of Black excellence to counter historical images, negative images in media, and to just normalize Black expressivity. And also an original foundational reason that really still holds true now and for the next 10 years plus, hopefully, is to be able to create a space of agency. I fought against being an orchestral musician because I'm too opinionated, and I love having a space where I'm able to express and have autonomy. And 100% selfish and all the right reasons to be able to create a space of financial opportunity for myself, for my co-founder, and certainly for the other Black artists that we engage. So the work that we do and the why that we do, I think still holds true today.
Thank you, Ashleigh. I'm going to just say up front, I wish I could can we just publish everybody's remarks so that I don't have to take so many notes? My hand is already tired, already tired. I want a copy of that because that's really, there's just some one fine points, and I know more to come. So I'm not going to just belabor the point. So everybody send those, drop them in the chat somehow. So could we hear maybe from Jeri Lynne?
Sure. I want to echo what a delight it is to be here as part of the panel. Familiar with the work of Ashleigh and Lee, and congratulations, Allyssa, on starting your own organization. You're on an exciting and exhausting journey starting your own. There will be lots of joy and lots of tears. Let's just be honest about that. So Running your own organization is not easy, very gratifying. So my organization, Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra, is now about 12 years old. Black Pearl is just a traditional chamber orchestra. We perform works from the standard repertoire as well as works by BIPOC and women composers as well. We also like to focus on highlighting our own musicians who are as soloists at times within the concerto repertoire. Black Pearl is not an all-Black organization. We like to say that we truly represent America. We have Black, white, Asian, Latinx, people from different gender identities, sexual orientations. For me, creating Black Pearl was about two things: democratizing creativity, and also that the belief that an orchestra in its ideal formation can be representative of American democracy in action. And that is everyone represented at the highest level, selected for their skills and their excellence, and people working together towards a common purpose of making music. And towards that end, for me, Black Pearl's mission was initially kind of expressed what I would like to say as a group of really objectives. And that was about creating concerts that connect countries and communities and cultures, that kind of put people in the middle of their own creativity by allowing them to participate in the musical experience rather than just being passive listeners. So we do a lot of community engagement and education work that really puts creativity and artistry in people's hands. The reason we do that is because I started Black Pearl after winning the Taki Alsop Conducting Fellowship with Marin years ago, and going out on the job audition trail, as we all do as musicians, and being told by one orchestra as the finalist that the reason why I was not selected to be their next music director was because I did not look like what the audience's expectation of the maestro should be. And that was very eye-opening for me. And so I founded Black Pearl as a way to transform that kind of grit of racism and sexism into something of great value and beauty. And so that's the name of Black Pearl, transforming that grit into grace. And so everything that we do in Black Pearl is kind of taking that statement of you don't look like a conductor on its head and making everyone into a conductor. So we teach people to conduct. And to go back to Ashleigh's statement, it's all about agency. And conducting for me is something that is just the embodiment of agency, and whether or not we teach young people to conduct and they go on to become classical musicians and conductors, or whether or not we're working with people who are just recently released, formerly incarcerated people, whether they're kids in the juvenile system or whether they're just adults in a corporate setting. It's all about tapping into people's agency. And so over the years, what we've understood is that Black Pearl's mission as an organization is really about transforming an orchestra from being a gatekeeper of an artistic product, like we own the music, we have the Beethoven, or we have the Florence Price, and you must come to us. So we're transforming the orchestra from being a gatekeeper in that sense to being a facilitator of the creative process.
That's fantastic. Two of the things that I've noted that you said, I love that transforming grit into grace. Yes. I kind of feel like we need bumper stickers.
Well, I want to make it easy for you, Allyssa, because I know you're writing stuff down. So I figure there's a nugget for you to just. Yeah.
Thanks. Because then there's the other one, the transforming the orchestra from gatekeeper to facilitator and putting creativity in the hands of the audience and the community. I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. More on all of this. Lee Kuntz, welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Is it my turn? Yeah.
It is your turn.
Thank you, Allyssa. And so honored to be on this panel with you and with Jeri, Lynne, and Ashleigh. It's also terrific not to be the moderator this time. So I'm really glad that you have those views on today. My name is Lee Kuntz, and I serve as President and Artistic Director of Gateways Music Festival, which will celebrate in 2023 its 30th anniversary. Gateways was founded in 1993 by Arminta Hummings Dumasani, one of the world's great pianists, now a retired Eastman School of Music faculty member, one of the Juilliard 100, a general force of nature who at, I think she's 86 years old now, has taken no medications in more than 60 years and who climbed Mount Kilimanjaro at age 78. Gateways was founded by a Black woman in the Black community and was supported for nearly 25 years, mostly by Black volunteers and donors in the Winston-Salem community and then in Rochester, New York. I first became involved with Gateways in, I think, 1997 when I was Director of Community Relations at the Chicago Symphony. And the symphony invited Arminta to bring a small group of musicians to Chicago for a 2-week residency. I joined the board soon after that. And upon Arminta's retirement, she appointed me the chair of a committee of musicians that would kind of take the lead on the festival's artistic leadership. And just based on what I've said, you know what I mean by appointed. Arminta really doesn't ask anybody to do anything, but when she appoints you to something, you do it. And I think anybody who knows Arminta would know that to be true. Our mission is to connect and support professional classical musicians of African descent and enlighten and inspire communities through the power of performance. In addition to calling attention to the important role people of African descent have played in classical music for centuries, the image of the Gateways Orchestra offers a counter narrative to the stereotypical images many people have of what a classical musician is. And we hope that our image, the image of the Gateways Music Festival Orchestra, will help our field, will inspire our field to accelerate and expand the important work toward diversity and inclusion. However, our primary goal is to serve as an antidote to the isolation and the underestimation experienced by many classical musicians of African descent, and to provide a vibrant and supportive community where those musicians are affirmed and where they can find an artistic home. Approximately 125 musicians participate in the festival each year. Most are players in symphony orchestras, faculty at music schools and conservatories, and active freelancers. The festival takes place over 6 to 7 days. This year it will be 7 days, and includes chamber music performances, guest artist performances, a film series, lectures, social and networking activities for the musicians. And while many of the performances take place in concert venues, the vast majority actually take place in the community, in houses of worship, in senior centers, schools and homeless shelters, recreation centers, libraries, and other places in the community. And finally, our next festival is scheduled for this April 18th through the 24th in Rochester, New York, and in New York City. And it will culminate in a Gateways Orchestra concert in Stern Auditorium at Carnegie Hall on Sunday, April 24th at 3:00 p.m. And that's everybody's invitation. We hope to see you there. Get your tickets now because they are going really fast. This performance is a historic performance as it represents the first all-Black classical orchestra that's ever been presented by Carnegie Hall on one of its seasons. So it will be a momentous and a historic occasion, and I hope to see many of you there.
Thank you, Lee, for that invitation. Those of us who do not live nearby, we're going to get in our planes and trains and automobiles and get there by hook or by crook. This is two now. So we had the opera go up, right? And now this.
That's right.
I'm a little emotional.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal.
So maybe let's start talking so I can go grab a tissue or something because it's a little bit emotional over here. So I want to start the conversation first by thanking you all again for being here, for what's about to happen, because I know wonderful things are going to be popping up, ideas and inspirations that folks can grab, advice. So let's just go ahead and get started and frame this conversation. So I want to go back to the part one conversation in 2019. And during her introduction, Chi-Chi said that it's important that we don't just walk through the door as organizations doing this work. It's important we don't just walk through the door and leave it open. We must walk through the door and hold it open. And during our prep call last week, the four of us spent most of our time talking about pivots and epiphanies over the last 2 years and how we all dealt with being 2020'd, because that's now a verb, being 2020'd, and then being 2021'd, because that is also now a verb. Specifically, we acknowledge that we need to keep pushing the DEIA momentum. Here's the alphabet soup time, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. Right, momentum kicked off by the pandemic and the literal parade of wake-up calls. Right, I like to think of it as the log having been turned over, and everyone can see all the stuff going on under that log, and we got to address it. So, with this in mind, let's get into our conversation in Q&A, and I'd like to start, because I get to. I'd like to start by asking all of you, how are you holding the door open? What alliances are holding the door open with you? And I would love just a quick whip just to kind of add to your introduction, maybe something specific that's happened since the shutdown and slow reopening, slowly coming back to something that resembles what we had before. How are you holding that door open? Jeri, Lynne, would you like to start with that?
Sure, thank you. Well, I'm holding the door open, I think, from a number of roles that I play. So, I'm also an active guest conductor. And as I mentioned, I won Marin Alsup's Talkie, now called Alsup Conducting Fellowship. It was first called Talkie Concordia Conducting Fellowship. But what's been really great since the pandemic and the great slowdown is that people who have not had time to connect are being able to reconnect. And Marin has actually done a really lovely job of reconnecting all the Talkie fellows. And announcements will be made, so I don't want to give anything away. And so really making sure that we continue as women conductors to reach out to each other. And also that we widen the people that we're working with and who we're aware of and how we can help, and being really intentional about the organizations with whom we work and how do we work with those organizations, and continuing to expand opportunities and just have these real conversations in these safe as well as brave spaces about what it's like being a woman conductor of color, and all these kinds of things. And so that's one way that I've been participating in that. I would say through Black Pearl, however, we've been doing that in a couple of ways. And I think a lot of organizations, really struggled across the board with how do we ensure that our musicians are able to survive this pandemic, not just physically in terms of their physical health, but also financially, to ensure that they don't peel off into some other a job that they could have because, they're not able to perform right now. And so just making sure that we are holding the door open in terms of empowering our musicians to take their own creativity into their hands and being able to monetize that in some way. And so just kind of, just not, for lack of a better, just throwing money at our musicians in a variety of ways and saying, look, don't do stuff free online, please. That's a very bad business model. We don't want to give our stuff away for free. Here's some money. Do what you love. Keep yourself out there, but we will give you money and support you while you do that. And then just, kind of throw a Black Pearl kind of logo on there and say, there's our quote unquote season. And that was just kind of the early way of just making sure we could support people in that capacity. The other way is also in terms of really being able to monetize the 12 years of data that we've gathered in what is effective at diversifying audiences and building new audiences, and how other organizations can take what we've learned to help create a much more reciprocal and mutually beneficial relationship with their audiences.
That's great. That's great. Not to break in, because I know I asked everyone to kind of answer that question, but the first question that we have from our viewers is to that. So I know I asked, how are you holding the door open? I just want to put a pin in what Jeri and Lynne said about empowering their musicians to monetize creativity, because we're going to come back to that. So with that, Lee, would you like to talk about how you're holding the door open?
Yeah. I love your comments, Jeri, Lynne. They are extraordinary. I've thought a lot about that question, and since Chi-Chi's statement and her wonderful statement, and I guess I would add a little bit to the statement, and add to it by saying, in addition to holding the door open, helping me walk through it. In the world of music and the world of classical music, just like in business, young Black musicians don't receive the mentoring and the support and the networks that their white counterparts receive. So yes, leave the door open, hold it open and help me walk through it. What type of support are we providing to young musicians who are aspiring to be in this field, so that they can become successful, and so that they can become fruitful? All of us on this call are, musicians, and the first Black mentor I think I had was my piano teacher at college. I was, 18 years old. Before that, there was nobody. I didn't know anybody who looked like me, who played the music that I played and played the music that I loved. So I think it's something that all of us can do, even if we're not involved in an organization. If we're not involved in a large organization or a small organization, as individuals, how do we find, in particular, those young Black kids who are aspiring, or who may aspire to become the next us in the future? So I just want to say that before starting. I think that by Gateways, by our founding mission and our founding programming, Gateways holds the door open just by the work that we do, by providing this safe space, this affirming space for more than 100 professional classical musicians, is a powerful act. And it encourages our musicians to go back to their communities. They're empowered, they are excited, and they want to hold the door open for others. We also have a Musicians Institute, which Jeri, Lynne was a part of in 2019, an incredibly wonderful and successful program that provides models for children of all backgrounds, of all races, provides models of them, of professional Black classical musicians, and helps to hold open that door. And I'd also say that, the pandemic period has been really hard on our industry and on musicians, and kind of like in every other way, when people say when the nation gets a cold, Black people get pneumonia. I feel like, for Black musicians, this has been a really tough time for many of them. Early on in the pandemic, I was surprised at one of our musicians' leadership meetings, and this was early on, how many of our musicians had come down with COVID in the early days of this pandemic, when virtually, you didn't know hardly anybody, and we had a call, and like over 50% of them had already been experiencing COVID. So I think that in our communities, when everybody else gets a cold, we get pneumonia. So we've had these virtual sessions starting this past fall with our musicians that I think have been very powerful in bringing our community together at a time when many of us feel disconnected. And so those are some of the things that we are trying to do to hold the door open.
Wonderful. Wow. I love this. You have kind of laid out a continuum, leaving the door open, holding the door open, helping people through the door, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to stick with me. That don't be surprised if that shows up in some session that I'm doing somewhere else. I will quote you. I'll give you credit for that.
Okay.
Ashleigh.
Yeah, thanks. I'm taking notes over here as well. When I think about the framing and the quote from Chi-Chi about holding the door, it for me is an active counter to the inevitable, which historically has happened of the door shutting. And we have these moments of intense racial awareness historically, and then this decline and what I consider this collective amnesia, this flat line. And so we're trying to counter that by actively holding the door open.
Yeah.
So for me, when I think about this and how it translates to the things that we're doing, and especially, the next decade, again, we're approaching an anniversary of how we can leverage our partnerships to help address issues that are more sector-wide in our industry with respect to lack of representation, lack of diversification of programming, specifically around African diasporic composers. And a lot of that has to do, and I know I remember Lee actually referencing this really eloquently on a former panel that we were on about lack of quality recordings and access to culturally responsive educational materials and access to music, access to scores. And so in thinking about some of the ways that we can help actively hold that door open so we don't dip as far down. I'm not trying to be a pessimistic. I think we are already on that decline, but we don't dip as far down. It's thinking of long-term strategic partnerships. And Allyssa, I'm totally going to reference you, even though it's not public knowledge, about a 3-year initiative with Rising Tides, your organization, and the Boston Public Systems, right? Where I have 16 out of 18 African diasporic composers commissioned, contracted an agreement, ranging in age, nationality, gender, sexuality, etc., to create beginner, intermediate, and advanced wind ensemble, string ensemble, and choral music that will be premiered by Boston Public School music students, that will be accompanied from Castle of Our Skin side with educational curriculum development for cultural responsive learning, and that will be published through Rising Tide, so that it's not a Boston specific, but global, national, international, all over the place, right? To make sure that stories are told authentically, that agency is given, financial information, recordings, etc., but making sure that that is an active, long-term, widespread net that we can cast. Another initiative that we're also, and this is public knowledge, so I'm not spilling beans with this one, is with the Boston Modern Orchestra Project and Odyssey Opera. Again, both specific here in Boston, but having large tentacles that I think can really have industry-wide impact. And that's a 5-year initiative with performing organization, opera and orchestral organization, to perform and record operas by 5 different Black composers: Anthony Davis and Kira Okoye, William Grant Still, Jonathan Bailey Holland, which would be a premiere, and Ulysses K. And then our work as an organization, again, Concert Education Series as Castle of Our Skins, is to create culturally responsive curriculum that when you purchase the recording, you get the curriculum guide. So any educator, any teacher globally can have access to this, right? And then very, very locally, we can work with school systems here in Boston, and we can provide adult education. So sort of 3 tiers in the work that we're doing, but thinking, how can we have the widest impact, cast the widest net to like wedge that door so it has a really big gap and it won't close, right? And then to Lee's point about mentorship, I have to give credit to an expanded team. It was largely a team of 1.5 for about 9 years, and added 3 other part-time people to my team, and I have to give credit for the work that they have done in 1 year and 1 month, I think, at this point. But one of my team members, David Norville, who is a fellow NEC alum, more recently than I, as an oboist, very much wanted to bring mentorship to Castle of Our Skins. And we do this one-on-one with our educational work, but thinking more college age, around his age. So he created, and Castle of Our Skins helped supported, this 5-month initiative, an intercollegiate Black Student Union Fellowship between New England Conservatory, Longy School of Music, and Boston Conservatory. And for anyone that is, has ever been to Boston and knows the Cambridge River, that river is wide. And it separates Cambridge, which is not the same as Boston, and there's no communication. So anyway, to be able to forge institutional collaboration using our platform to be able to do so, we have access to space, we have access to visibility, we have access to some dollars. Can we just come together for some fellowships and mentoring, pizza, conversation, what we can make during this virtual experience, and then to co-create a performance together. So February 12th, if anyone's in the Boston area, What is Black Creativity is a co-produced with all 8 of our fellows concert experience that ranges from Lauryn Hill to world premieres by some of the composers in the program, and is a capstone of a 3-day residency, which includes financial literacy workshop, it includes a health and wellness workshop, it includes members from the Boston Musicians Association talking about union and representation, as well as just a photo booth, and more pizza. So all of that, I think, is so important and needed on a real micro level, the human to human connection, and then also industry wide, and thinking about how to actively counter what we know is a historical trend of this collective amnesia and that door really closing.
That's amazing. Please say hi to David for me. That's amazing. The connection across that river. Yes, it's a beautiful model. I hope we get to see Castle of Our Skins kind of help to replicate that in other cities. I think that would be just fantastic. So let's get to some questions from our viewers. We have this first question. I ended with Ashleigh on purpose so you could pick up the next question. So Ashleigh and panel, can you speak more to how you're creating a space of financial opportunity for yourselves and musicians in your organization, operational funding versus programmatic funding, et cetera? So this is that pin that I put in our conversation after Jeri Lynne's comments about helping musicians monetize their creativity. So Ashleigh, can you start? And then Lee, if you wouldn't mind picking that up again. And then if there's anything else that you wanted to add to that, Jeri Lynne, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, so do you mind repeating again, organizationally and programmatically?
Programmatically, yeah.
How we're creating financial agency?
Yes.
Yeah, well, from day one, everyone got paid. And I am such an advocate for that. Everyone, if you are a musician, if you're the sound engineer, if you're the videographer, if you're the graphic designer, if you are production coordinator, there's payment. When people... I question sometimes again, educator of 20 years in a sort of kindergarten-like teacher way, when people want to undercut their services, I try to share how I view financial remuneration as being an acknowledgement of your skills, as being an acknowledgement of the skills that you have gleaned from your mentors and their mentors, and a representation of acknowledgement. I'm acknowledging you through financial and hopefully plus. So I try to I try to honor that as best I can. And when, for instance, even recently a videographer that I was working with, who is not in Boston, and maybe there's different rates for videography, was creating a 10-minute film that will be world premiere in March, that involves poetry, that involves traveling about an hour to do site documentation and working with an audio engineer in a different state. Offered a quote that was less than what I was prepared to offer, a Black woman, and I told her, okay, I'm going to give you twice your fee, and this is why. To show and value your work, to understand industry standards, because you are part of this industry, and that standard is one that other people are being held to. and is one that you deserve to be held to as well. So I don't know if I'm breaking up my screen for a little bit here, but I try to model that with the organization, and I try to express that to the people that I engage with programmatically as artists.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for that, Lee.
Sure, and I'll try to be brief. As a former, performing musician, I made my livelihood that way. How musicians are compensated has always been something very important to me. As I went into the administrative kind of sphere, at Gateways, in the early days of Gateway's founding, many musicians participated in Gateways for the love of it. And received very, very small honorariums for, a week of really, in some cases, grueling work. And I'm talking, a couple $100 sometimes for 6 or 7 days, but they were, in those days, happy to do it. And Armenta made Gateways happen the way that many small Black organizations make things happen, making a way out of no way. And so that's how Gateways happened for many of its early years. And when I started, it had always been my goal to get Gateways musicians at the pay level of, well, we say we're professional classical musicians, to pay them accordingly. And, I'm really pleased that this coming festival year, we will be paying a little over the minimum union rates in Rochester and in New York City, which is extraordinary for our tiny little organization. It has grown our budget from, I think, and back in the 1990s, probably $100,000 a year. And our budget this year is $1.6 million. But it's important. Compensating musicians for their work is essential. And it's something that's very important to me personally, very important to our former conductor, Michael Morgan, and very important to our board. And so they've supported it. And so, yes.
Thank you.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Jeri Lynne.
I will just add on to what Lee has just said, that the work is essential. Musicians, as we saw during the pandemic, are essential workers. Arts jobs are jobs, and it's important that we as musicians and arts administrators and founders, because I feel like especially founders of organizations tend to undercut their own work, and that's part of the founder's guilt. You want to make sure that you're feeding your family and your workers before you feed yourselves. I always tell people this is kind of like the airplane thing of put your life vest on first before you help someone else. Like you have to really take care of yourselves, but paying yourself what you're worth, to Ashleigh and to Lee's point, is part of the longevity and sustainability of arts organizations. We have to eat in order to play our instruments and be creative. And so Black Pearl was established on a very firm financial footing from the very beginning. And also, interestingly, at a time of financial crisis in this country. In 2008, when the whole financial collapse and the bubble and everything just fell apart, is when Black Pearl started. And so we made our reputation and were able to attract the very best and brightest musicians in our orbit between Curtis and Juilliard and Peabody on the Eastern Seaboard, because we were opening our doors at a time when other people, for financial reasons, were having to scale back and or just close their doors entirely. And we were able to pay people on time and in full. And we have maintained that tradition for 12 years. No one has ever missed a payment or not been paid, except for maybe myself. Again, founder's guilt. But everybody else gets paid in full and on time. And as we continue to grow and monetize and capitalize upon the data and the experience and the expertise that Black Pearl has developed, again, that now becomes an ability to diversify our income stream, not just individual donors, not just foundations, not just government, although yes, thank you, NEA, for our $100,000 grant. But and Gateway's like, but to be able to control a little bit of our financial future. And that's important, because as you begin to expand your corporate sponsorships and all these other kinds of dollars, it's important to understand to everyone's point and to the question before that Chi had posed about holding that door open, and to Ashleigh's point about making sure that door stays open, to understand that the corporate sponsors and the foundations need us as much as we need them. The work that we are doing is essential. And so that changes the power dynamic about how we speak about the work that is being done in art forms by BIPOC-led organizations to really advance the goals of democracy. Because we are, as artists of any race, color, and creed, we are the storytellers. And so we are the holders of culture. And so everything that's happening right now in America, we have the power and the ability to impact that conversation nationwide, whether it's within the arts or beyond. And so again, funders, corporate sponsors, they need us as much as we need them.
Yes. Thank you for your note about diversifying the income stream. That's really, really important. I think one of my father is an entrepreneurship teacher, an educator in business. And so he looks at me in my nonprofit space, sometimes like, "Whoa, you need to figure out how to not." But the thing that I take away from that is not being afraid to kind of cross over a little bit, right? So what are the ways that you can, as an organization or as an individual, invest in things that will create a passive income stream also, so that you have, that coming in. If honestly, for my money, if I can figure out how Rising Tide can buy a parking lot, we're going to do it. We're going to buy a parking lot.
I support you in that.
Thank you. I'll let you know how that happens when it happens. Also a bit about Rising Tide, and I just am so inspired by my colleagues here, but I founded it with this in mind, right? So we don't take a cut. So it's a consignment shop, right? It's not a traditional publisher. So the composer quotes the price with some guidance, and that's what they get. Right. So our operating funds come from elsewhere. We're not relying upon, we're not taking that off the back of the work of the composers, right? Your work is your work. It comes in. We'll figure out a way to keep our lights on, right? In other ways. We're not going to do it on the notes on the page. We're not doing that, right? That is about you. So in terms of time, we're running short because I can't help myself. And I've been breaking the moderator rule of not asking everybody all the questions, but I can't help it because everyone has so much to say, and we've got these wonderful questions coming in. So I think I'll just pull some and see if we can get some quick responses. And perhaps, I don't know if this is okay, but maybe if you feel comfortable commenting further, if it's not you on the mic on a question, maybe commenting further in the chat so that people have some of your thoughts, that might be nice. So another question that we have, and this one is Jeri was kind of pointed at during this question. How specifically your organization engages audiences in the creative process, not just expecting to be spectators? So talk maybe a bit about how you do that.
Sure. Is it okay? Well, I'm happy to talk about that, but can we maybe do a question where all of us can, I'm happy to talk about that maybe in the chat or as a drop-in.
Sure.
But I would prefer that, since we have all of us here, to get to a question where we can all be engaged, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. No, it does ask all the panelists, but you are specifically singled out. Yeah. Okay. So I think that all of these questions we'll definitely love to have everyone answer. But in terms of time, if we want to have one or two people say, I just want to make sure that we honor the fact that some folks dropped questions in the chat and we want to get through all of them. And it's entirely my fault. I take the blame because I'm being greedy.
That's quite all right. So I would say it's a general mindset about I would say to everyone out there, one of the things that we as artists and classical musicians get really caught up in is focusing on the art as the goal of what we do. And my mindset is that the art is itself an instrument for developing people. Developing audiences, developing the youth that we work with, developing the adults that we work with, but whatever it is, that the art is not the end, the art is the means to an end. So I would say, however you can begin to transform your thinking around that would be a way for you to begin to engage your audiences in more active ways.
Thank you, Jeri. That's really important. We're talking a lot about that in the K-12 space, a lot about that in the higher ed space where I'm seated now. And I'm glad we went ahead and pushed through and have you answer that question, because that right there is something that we need to put a snippet in everybody's sessions or whatever, wherever, where we're talking about creativity in classrooms, creativity in ensembles, right? Large ensembles in school spaces, especially, where it's really hard to get people thinking about how to make creativity the center of what's happening, as opposed to, learning things to perform, right? So I thank you for that. Thank you for going with me on that. Appreciate it. Let's see. Question 3. Can you talk about the makeup of your audiences? If you have a primarily Black audience, how do you reach out to white patrons, or vice versa? We talked a little bit about this in our pre-chat. Do we want to do a quick whip and talk about that? Let's start with Lee.
Sure. We did talk about this, and I think it's a challenge for many of our organizations to have really diverse audiences. Our orchestra concerts for Gateways are predominantly white. And that happens, I think, because those concerts take place in the venue that primarily attracts a white audience. And so the musicians sitting on stage have over the years commented, how can we increase the number of Black folks in our audiences for the full orchestra concert? And so that's something that we're working on and that has increased over time slowly. But I think it really does boil down to venue. But luckily, the majority of our performances are in the community, in the Black community. So if you're going where your community is, and it is our community, we're not doing outreach, it is our community, they are us, we are them, then you are guaranteed of having more Black folks in the audience. And so I think the concert that Jeri, Lynne conducted for Gateways at Mount Olivet Baptist Church was probably a 50-50 Black and white audience. And so I think that's what you get when you go into the community. And they stayed there forever because that concert was so long, unfortunately. But anyway, so I think going to where communities are will make a huge difference, in short.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a few things, and some of it is to earlier questions. So I'm just going to rattle off a couple things. With respect to the finances, I very much work collaboratively and appreciate and acknowledge that I am a benefactor of the ecosystem, the artistic ecosystem in which I occupy, and I'm also a contributor to it. So it is to my advantage to make sure that my neighbor is taken care of, and my neighbor, my artist, my whom I engage with and who I am in collaboration, not competition with, that we are all benefiting. And similar to like a union mentality, there's certain standards. So it's to my acknowledgement, to my credit, to be able to make sure that you're not undercutting yourself, because it hurts the industry. To the thought of audience engagement, and also to this question about audiences, I very much am excited by bringing in a Zimbabwean spoken word artist and a contemporary Black dancer, and working with an amazing Indigenous visual artist, etc., and having their voice and agency be part of the programming, and also having their audience and their platforms amplify who this programming is for. So the collaborative aspect, not sort of pedestaling the music, but there's all sorts of things that are involved in the creative process, and all sorts of people that are involved in the creative process, and obviously have their own networks. And then with the I guess to the earlier question about having audiences not be spectators, the creative process for me is multi-layered. So yes, there's a concert if that's what we're focusing on, as opposed to something educational, even though for me it's one and the same. But the concert may have a month-long virtual Black market. And this is something we did with a program called Black Love. It was a digital Black market. Use code Black Love to get 10% off body butter and stationery and food and who knows what. But the audience has, in terms of a creative process, ultimately, foundationally, fostering cultural curiosity, celebrating Black artistry. That is the outcome of a creative process, whether or not it's on stage or elsewhere. So getting, wouldn't even say creative, but just providing opportunities for your audience to be involved in multiple layers of a creative process that is not solely tied into what happens on stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have one more question and about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to throw this out there, and we'll see what happens. How does a music school move from gatekeeper to facilitator in terms of audiences? And this is asked by a trustee of the Longy School of Music in Cambridge. But I think that, just to start, I think that it's that's kind of the culmination of everything that we talked about, right? So a music school, thinking about who they're bringing in, thinking about what they're programming, thinking about the audition requirements, how taken objectively and strictly, how that impacts who shows up, right? I think there's a little bit of the answer to this question, or an answer to this question, everything we've talked about. Jeri, Lynne, would you like to kind of maybe take a stab at a quick summary?
I would say just very quickly, because I want to make sure we all have a chance, is really you're going to need someone perhaps from the outside, whether it's a consultant or something like that, take a look at the real versus perceived barriers. And that could be both, because, I went to Wellesley, so I'm very familiar with Longy, looking at barriers with Harvard and the wider Cambridge community in terms of who's coming, who's not coming, why aren't they coming, who's engaged, who isn't, why aren't they engaged, but really taking a look at that, because when you're inside the fishbowl of how things operate, you may not be aware of the various perceptions and underlying assumptions about the way that things traditionally and have always operated. So maybe an outside eye would be best to kind of help you identify what those real and perceived barriers are.
Really important, real versus perceived. Ashleigh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jeri Lynne said it so well, and there's, sort of quick sort of Band-Aid answers in terms of what you can do with marketing, what you can do with language, what you can do with optics. I laugh when I see, not for Longy specifically, but when I see promotional materials post 2020 and there's just Black faces on covers of large white institutions. I'm like, is that a stock photo image, or is that someone? Where did you get that, and how is it that now all of a sudden there's this narrative of we are open and a welcoming space for you, where I'm pretty sure I visited your space and have not felt that way. So there's somewhat of a disconnect with low-hanging fruit of changing things too quickly without having an actual structure that is supportive. So to Jeri Lynne's point, like it takes effort, it takes thought, it takes care, consideration. It can't be rushed, although we want it rushed. We, as in certainly myself, want it rushed because we've been waiting for a long time. But it takes care to be able to do so, and ultimately takes listening. So listening tours, listening circles. If you bring, I'll in full disclosure, Castle of Our Skins is a music ensemble and resident at Longy School of Music, and I have been feeling that I am able to present an idea, and the idea is met, and the idea is supported. So in terms of facilitating a conversation, allowing your audience, allowing your invited guest, allowing for whom you are sharing space to take lead, I think is great, and allowing the mouth to soften a little bit so that the ears can open, I think is also really appreciated.
Great. Lee, real quick, 20 seconds.
Say, representation matters. I think how the staffs at our schools, music schools, look like, what they look like, what the administration looks like, what the faculty looks like is hugely important. And too many of our schools lack representation. I'm going to call out a school right now that I'm just thrilled with is Curtis Institute, who hired the entire Imani Wenz. And Michelle Kahn is the chair of the piano department. Oh my God. And so all of these schools out there saying, well, we can't find anybody, we don't know anybody, stop it. So I think representation matters. And until you can walk into a school and you see people who look like you in every single role other than the janitors and the housekeepers, then when we can see that, then things will start to change. But we have a long way to go.
We indeed have a long way to go, and unfortunately not in this session. The time is up. Let's hope for part 3. Please help me thank our guests today, Lee and Jeri, Lynne, and Ashleigh. Thank you to the Sphinx organization for this great session, to all of you for attending. Please catch us wherever it says somewhere to catch us. We are here for you, and I, for one, will be bugging these folks far into the future. Thank you all so much for your wonderful thoughts and for being here today. Have a wonderful time here at Sphinx Connect.
Thank you, Ashleigh and Jeri, Lynne.
Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye.